I wanted to start off with a couple of things from last time, including Michael Schwartz here sent me a page from, is this Steinsaltz's Rambam?
Yeah, the Korn Steinsaltz, yeah.
Okay, so I'd never seen this, but as you Steinsaltz, of course, has, excellent annotation. And he brings, I think we may have looked briefly in Shir, I don't remember, but it's something I used in preparation. So Rambam says, HaKiyor hayulo shne tad, right? The Kiyor had 12 teats, in other words, 12 spouts. Kedei shiyu kol hakohanim haoskim b'tamid kadshin mimenu ke'echad, right? So that all the Kohanim who had to work on the Korban Tamid in the morning could wash themselves simultaneously. Umuchni asulo shiyu bahamayim tamid, and they made a muchni for it, so that there would always be water in it. Vihi chol, as we discussed, the muchni is chol. I think I showed you this the last time. In other words, it wasn't a kli sharet. Kedei shelo yu amayim sheba nifsalin belina, so that the water that would be in it would not pasul by staying overnight. Shakior miklei hakodesh u'mikesh. The kior is one of the klei kodesh. It's holy. It was sanctified for use in the Beit HaMikdash. And it's mikesh. In other words, the water that gets put into it becomes kadosh because it came into the kli sharet. B'chol davar sheyitkadesh b'chli kodesh im lan nifsal. Right. So this is a general rule. Anything that became kodesh because it put into a kli sharet, if it was left overnight, if whatever was in the kli was left overnight, nifsal, it becomes pasul. Okay, so here, actually, before we look at the pictures, so here we have the Ravad. We haven't looked at the Ravad very much. Ravad was actually an elder contemporary of the Rambam in Provence. And in Posquier, famously Posquier. And in the yeshiva world, he became most famous because of his hasagot, his critiques, and basically attacks in many places on the Rambam. And that was real, that's an interesting discussion unto itself. Rabbi Yitzchak Twersky, who I was privileged to daven at his shul, to learn from him to some degree, and believe Shuli, your husband, got his doctorate from Rabbi Twersky. Is that correct?
Yeah, he studied with him.
He studied with him. Yeah. So Rabbi Twersky's thesis was on the Ravad, and he goes into great detail about the things, especially these things that the Ravad talks about on the Rambam. But it's important to know that the Ravad wrote other works, and he was, in his time, the Gadol Hador in his part of the world. So attack the Rambam on in many ways and many levels. His most basic attack on him, which he talks about in the beginning on the Rambam's own introduction, he was one of the people who didn't like the fact that the Rambam had presented this comprehensive work of halacha without sources. And he will well, you know what? I don't have to go into that in great detail. We'll see an example of one of his disagreements. Ravad takes the in the question of the kior, he takes the attitude of Rashi, which was the attitude we saw. It was one of the first perush we saw in the Bartanura. So he says, "Umuchni asulo, Amar Avraham." Right, his name was Avraham, the Ravad. Avraham ben David was his name, the Ravad. Dvarim zarim ani roeh bekan. I see strange things here. We have received, in other words, our tradition is that the muchni was receptacle of water. Galgal, kiyor u'mashakin oto hu umemav bebor ha'azara ba'erev. Right, so there it was. In fact, it was a wheel that was tied to the key, a rope, and it was used to lower the car. Just a second. Its waters into a system that was in the Azara at night, right, in the evening at night. Kadeshiu meimav mechubarim, so that its waters would be connected directly to the water that's in the bore. V'lo yipaslu b'li, therefore they wouldn't become pasul by left overnight. Mufurash kol zer b'yoma u'b'zvach. So actually, maybe at some point we'll go into this a little bit more, but the truth is when you learn the sugya and zvachim, it's hard to understand exactly how the Rambam understood that sugya, because the way Rashi and after him the Ravad and a lot of Acharonim understood it seems to make more sense. Brings these two pictures. So this would be the Shita of the Rambam, something like this, where you have the kior, and then this muchni was put on top of it, and then there must have been a way to release the water from the muchni into the kior, and by the same token, of course, to close it off so that the water wouldn't just automatically go down into the kior. So then any was left over at the end of the day could just stay in the muchni.
It's a
And
samovar.
what did you say? Samovar.
It looks like a giant samovar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Precisely.
Yes, exactly. And right, according to the well, I mean, this is from the Gemara, that it would have had. We saw this in the Mishnah, right? That this was one of the things that Ben Katin did. He gave it 12 spouts, 12 spigots of some sort, because originally it only had two. And this would be something like the way it would have been for, according to Rashi, although what's interesting, right, in other words here, so you have the kior, it's attached to this rope, which looks like a chain, could be a chain, and then, you know, they would hoist it up and then they could put it in down through this hole and it could stay there overnight. According to, I don't know anything about these illustrations, but I do wonder about why in this illustration it has this extra tank on top, right? Because it would seem that that's something that you would only have put on because of what the Rambam said. But I don't know. I mean, it's somebody's educated guess about the kior would have looked like. So thank you, Michael Schwartz, for sending that to me. I think that was helpful. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to mention from last time at the end of the last Mishnah, when I was gushing through, this is really like a footnote in terms of what we're talking about, but I think it was worth pointing out so that this would be a little more clear. So here in Mishnah Daled, we're talking about the person who's gone off to do Trumat. And so we'll just read it again quickly. Lo hayuro ino tov lo shomin et kolo shomin kol ha'etz. So the Adhanim who are now turning around the place where they made the chavitin, they wouldn't see him and they wouldn't hear his voice or his sound. Ad sheshomin kol ha'etz shasa ben katin muchnin lakior, until they heard until they heard the wooden thing, whatever the wooden thing was, that Ben Katin made as a muchni for the kiyor. So according to the way the Bart explained, the way the Rashi explains and the Ravad explains, so we understand the A would have been the Galgal itself. It would have been the wheel. And according to the Rambam, I speculated that maybe it was some kind of a wooden handle or that would release the water into the ground, but I'm not sure about that. So they would tell that Kohen that the time has come. He would wash his hands and legs from the kiyor, and we'll take a little look at a diagram of the Mizbeach a little later in a moment, maybe. So he would take the coal shovel that was made of silver, and he'd go up to the head of the altar. He would move around the gechalim, the coals here and there. And then from the ones that were consumed from the inside, in other words, the innermost ones, that were, as the Bartanun explained, that were in the middle of the fire, that they were well consumed and they were very close to becoming ash, and they would go down. He'd come down to the floor. He would turn his face northward, right? And I will show you the diagram of the Mizbeach in a moment. But as I explained, when he walked down, he was walking down facing south, and then he would get to the bottom and it was saying hafach, so then he would have to turn around to make his face northward. Halach lemizracho shel kevesh ke'eser amot. He walked to the east of the ramp, about 10 amot. Savart et hagachal gabei haritzpa, and he would gather, pile up the coals onto the floor. Rachok min hakevesh shlosha tvachim, 3 tvachim away kevesh. Makom shenotnim murot ha'of mizbeach ha'panimi v'hamnorah. So where they would put the crops of the bird sacrifices, and dishuna mizbeach ha'panimi. In other words, not just the ash from this altar, but also the ash from the golden altar that died, and also the ash that would have been left over the menorah. So I wanted to explain to you a little bit more about Murot HaOf. I kind of glossed over that. So we'll take a quick at the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah in Zvachim, the 6th chapter, and the 5th Mishnah. We've touched before on this on the I'm sorry, what did I say? It's the 6th chapter, the 5th Mishnah. We've looked at least referenced it more than once, the Mishnah and the previous chapter. And the Mishnah of the previous chapter is Ezehum Komanchim, which is found in the Sidur, and lays out most of the korbanot that were brought in the Beit HaMikdash. And when we get into the next chapter, it's a continuation of this discussion about sort of the nuts and bolts of various korbanot. So here, Olata Of Ketzad Haitana Seit. So how is the Olata Of done? How is the Olah that came from fowl done? The Kevesh, he would go up on the ramp, Ufanala Sovev, he would turn toward the Sovev. And I'll show you what the Sovev is, sort of like a middle part of the Mizbeach on the way up. I'll explain it in Balo Lekeren Dromit Mizrachit, he'd come to the southeast corner, Hayamolek Eta Mimul Arpa Umavdil, and then he would be Molek the Rosh. Lika was this process that you may know that he had to take his a very long fingernail and stick it into the back of the neck of the oaf. In other words, olot oaf, or any kind of oaf, was not shechted in the Beit HaMikdash. And parenthetically, there's a machloket in the Gemara about whether or not shchita for oaf is dioraita or derabanan, because there isn't a precedent for it in the Torah per se. That what they did instead was they would do malika, which actually would have been a much more immediate way of killing the because he would puncture the spinal cord at the top, and I don't remember the anatomy exactly, but anywhere around up there, if it gets punctured, you just die immediately. You don't feel anything, you die immediately. This is a little bit graphic. Okay, Hayam Moleket Mimul Arpa, he would do the mulu in the head, next to the bat's neck, Umavdil, he would separate both the windpipe and the food pipe. And then he puts blood on the wall of the altar. Natalat Rosh, he would head, he kif beit malika tola mizbeach. He would take the place where it was cut with the malika around the mizbeach, usvako b'melach. He would soak it in salt. There are actually different perushim about exactly what that means, but like he would probably damp it in salt. Uzrakal gabeishim, and then he would throw it onto the fires. Balo beisirat hamurah. So this murah, he would come to the body, because he took the head. Now he's going to go back to the body. He's going to remove the crop. Ve'etanotza. The notza would be like the end part of the bird. Ve'bnei hame'ayim, and the intestines, ayotzimima, that come out with it. V'yishichan leveit hadashen, right? And that's what our Mishnah in Tamid was talking about. There was a place next to the Mizbeach where we would put the Trumat Hadeshen. That's also where they would put Ha'of as they were to the end of this process of the Olata of Shisa V'Lohivdil dealing. Okay, so that's technical part. Okay, so while we have this open, let me show you about the Mizbeach. Again, this is also from the end of like a standard Mishnayot. It's reasonably well done, but again, like I don't think the like this I don't think is exactly the right that it should be relative to the Mach, but it's okay. We don't have to get into deep detail right now. So this, right, so he would come to the Mizbeach by walking from the south, facing north, and go up on the Kevesh. And this is the sovev, and I'll explain the sovev by looking at, I think it's the next picture. This is a side view. These are side views of the Mizbeach. So there's so here is like the base of the Mizbeach, and then it goes up. And then this here is the Sovev, because it goes all the way around, and it sticks out an Amma. It's a place where you can see it here on this side view. This is, they decorated it so you can see. This is the Sovev. So when he says he goes around the Sovev, that's the Sovev. It's a part of the Mizbeach. So he would walk up the ramp and go onto the Sovev. That's the overhead view. Okay. Okay. Any questions? No. Okay.
Shell,
Yes.
this machta, this shovel, was this so big that you could in one time, in one run, take all the deshen and bring it down? Because it seems that it goes only once there.
That so it depends, but no, he would not necessarily. He might have had to do it more than once. As we'll see, as we go into the next Mishnah, we'll see, because sometimes there was a huge there. Yes, Shira, what did you want to say?
So I remember from Rav Hirsch, it's only a comet, so like a portion you can grasp with your hand, so it's not so big. So seems to be a little, but that would be a problem. What is the relationship between these two ashes? So we come to this topic.
Yeah, we'll talk a little more about it today.
But okay, it's Shell, it's right. It's only comets, so it's a handful, so you can grasp. It's not so much. It's yeah. Okay.
Right, and
this means that he has to run up the kevesh and down and up and down just to get many times.
Well, possibly, as we'll see, because sometimes there was a lot. I don't know exactly how big they made the machta for him to scoop up the ash, but bonagid, it wasn't a terribly long distance, but yeah, it was work. It was work. He'd have to go up the kevesh to do the work. So,
is there an explicit reason why he had to walk around rather than directly?
Why he had to walk around? We're
why
talking
he had to
about
go around the Sovev instead of going directly to where he was going.
I think, hold on a second, let me bring that up again. We'll look for a moment at the Bar Tanura here. I think it might make it a little bit clearer. It says, right, Lefi Shalata Ha'of Naset. Actually, I'm not sure if we should get into it. When it says, just a second. So the places where the Kohanim would stand when they did various things on the Mizbeach were learned out from different sources. Let's take a quick look at the Bartanura. Allah bekevesh, he would go up onto the ram. The olata of naset lemala. The olata of was done on top. The locht olata of yisod, because it doesn't say by the olata of yisod. Yisod would mean that it's done down at the base of the mizbeach. Ela b'chatata of bilvad. By the chatata of it does say el yisod of mizbeach. Uvebehema ipcha, with animal sacrifices, it was the chatat behema naset lamal. The chatat of the animal that was made from an animal was done on top. Dichtiv ba karnot hamizbeach, because it said you have to come to the corners of the mizbeach. Ve'rat behema lamata. Dichtiv el yisod mizbeach ha'olah, tala yisod ba'olah. So why did he go to Dromit Mizrachit? Ba'ala l'keren Dromit Mizrachit. Why did he go to the southeast? Because it was close to the Beit Hadeshin. Shesham mashlicha murav anotza. That's where he's going to throw the crop and the hind part of the bird. It was to Dromit Mizrachit for a practical reason. But in terms of where he had to stand to do the Malika and all of that, those things are dictated in the Torah. They're understood to be dictated in the Torah. Right, just to orient ourselves. So he would come to this. So this is Dromit Mizrachi, right? This is south, and this is east. And this is where he would come to. And the Beit Hadeshen, he would have gone right, he would go down here, and then he would go up 10 amot, and 3 tfachim away from the Mizbeach. This would be that would be the Beit Hadeshen. So his route would have been, like up here, and then here. So it was relatively close to where he had to bring it, or he could throw it there. Okay. Let's look at so look at the now in the next chapter. Ra'u echav shi'arad. His brethren, the other Kohanim who were standing around, they would see him come down. Ratzu uvao, and they would run and come. So when it says that they saw him come down, I will also imagine when it's not a cloudy day, by now it's getting to be more light, more natural light. Because remember, at the end of the last chapter, he had to navigate his way to the Mizbeach in the dark, just looking at the light that was coming from the fire on the Mizbeach. But now they could probably at least see his silhouette when he's coming down. Maharu v'kichui dehen v'raglehen min hakior. So they go and sanctify their hands and their legs from the kior. In other words, they would wash hands and legs. That's the kiddush, right? We talked about in Yoma. They washed their hands and legs, and so machloket in the Gemara exactly how they stood. But just imagine, at least according to one day, that they stood. They would put their hands on their legs and then have the water spill out on their hands and legs at the same time. They would take the rakes and the tzinorot, v'yalu l'rosh mizbeach, and go up to top of the mizbeach. Ha'evarim v'aptarim shelo nit'aklu mi'erev, right? So the limbs and the innards that were not consumed night, sonkino tamid tzadei mizbeach. They would push them aside to the sides of the mizbeach. Menat stadin machzikin, if the sides wouldn't hold, in other words, wasn't enough room on the sides, so drino tam basovev al hakevesh. So then they would put them, so literally they put them on the sovev that's on the ramp. We'll see the Bartanur explains it a little bit differently. So Ra'uhav, his friend, his Kohanim friends, his Kohanim brethren, they would see Lo Tosha Taramat Mizbeach. They'd see the person who just did Trumata Deshen, Sheyar, that he went down, Min HaMizbeach, Venatan et HaGechalim b'Mizracha, and he placed the coals to the east, as we saw in the diagram. So that they could do, right, go ahead and wash, so that they could do their avodah. Right? It's a prerequisite to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before you start the avodah. So that was their sig, waited for him to do Trumat Deshem, and then they would go and wash so that they could start to do theirs. So they would go up and Sonkin Misalkinotan would remove the Evarim Updarim, the limbs and the innards, and Lashon Nianua v'Ninud, right? Sonkin, he says, is a of movement, right? Nianua and Ninud. V'chein Kigdi Misankan. There's a similar language that's found in the Gemara. Gedishu ayef al-yedei yanua nigichot shemenagchin zeh bazeh. There, what's Gedi Misankan? The Gedi that's Misanek is the Gedi that's tired, and through its movements and its gorings, it's like ramming into other kids, because they would play by ramming their heads into each other. Afkan sonkin mina'anin mahapchinotan b'tzinorot litztadei hamizbeach. So here also sonkin means that they would move and turn these other parts that hadn't completely burnt with their tzinorot, which is a kind of kli, I guess, that was shaped to. Tzinor is a pipe, and it was some kind of probably something long that they could use to push the parts onto that side, to the sides of the mizbeach. And if there wasn't enough room on the tzaddim, then they would arrange the sovev al hakevesh. Klomar al hakevesh shekeneged hasovev. They would put them on the ground next to where the sovev was, right? So I think we saw in the picture. So wherever they would get it from, they would arrange, around here. That would be where it would come even with the sovev.
Shall I have a question?
Actually, maybe more. Sure.
So I wonder why Bartanura brings an explanation from living animals to explain the movement of living animals like, calf and the horns and the rams, to explain the pieces of the sacrificed animals. So many ways to explain this movement, but he's bringing this from the living animals, and it seems to me it's not by chance, perhaps.
I think it just is the term, this shoresh of sanak is rare, right? It's not a common term.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to just bring another proof text to show what it means. So, and I apologize because actually now I thought I was going to research it a little bit. I'll do it for next time. But I think one might think that Sonkin, in fact, that the Nun and the Lamed, could be interchangeable, and Ne and a Le are very similar, and Sonkin could have just have been literally the same thing as Misal. But we do find the language with Sanak elsewhere. And there it means movement. Either it means to remove or it means to move, basically. So, that's what he was saying. But he brings it from there just because that's another rare instance where the same word is used. So things are picked here. We're in Mishnah Bet. Echelu ma'alin ba'efer al gabei tapuach. So then they started to bring the ash up onto the tapuach, right? So tapuach is an apple, or it means something that's like big and round. The tapuach haya be'emtza hamizbeach. The tapuach was in the middle of the mizbeach. Pa'amim alav kishlosh mur. Sometimes it had 300 kur gathered up, and it got to be an amount, which the Bartenu is going to explain was a guzma, like it's an exaggeration, but it means a huge amount of ash could be gathered up there. By the way, before I go on, just something that Paul brought up. The main thing that it's described to us, Trumat Hadeshin, is the minimum of what had to be done. In other words, it's not necessarily true that he had to take off the deshin every day, but there's a mitzvah, Torah, to do Trumat Hadeshin every day. So if he went up and he took a stool and then went down and put it in this Beit Hadeshin next to the Mizbeach, then he would have accomplished that mitzvah. Uveregalim lo hayim medashnin ota. On the regalim, they wouldn't remove the deshen because it was a beauty, right? It was something. It was like for the greater glory of the show that so many korbanot had been brought, and this was the amount of accumulated ash. Mimav lo nitas tseil hakohen milahotzi et hadeshen. But it was never the case that a kohen would be lazy about removing the deshen. So why is this brought? What's the point of saying that the kohen wouldn't have been lazy about removing?
If he didn't have to take all of it, you could have thought that if he left it, he's being lazy. But here it's saying that he's leaving it because it's a noi, it's a adornment to beautifying the mizbeach.
Yes, good, right? Exactly. And you might have thought, the Kohanim aren't doing their job, but that's not the point. Exactly what you said. It's not the point. The Kohanim were doing their. This was known, but sometimes they would leave it to accumulate just because it was Noilam Mizbeach. So let's see the Bartanura. Hechelu ma'alin ba'efer, the achash silku l'tztadim, o l'sovev, ufdarim shelo nitaklu. After they had removed to the sides or to the sovev, depending on how much there was, the limbs and the innards that had not been consumed. So then they would drag the ash with their rakes that they had in their they would bring it to the tapuach. And what the tapuach was kamin kri gadol shel efer. It was like a big pile of ash. Shaya be'emtza hamizbeach, that was in the middle of the altar, tzavur v'asui k'tapuach. It was gathered together and made like a tapuach, like an apple. So just to remind us here, wait a second. So this would have been a tapuach. It would have been this gathering of ash in the middle of the mizbeach.
Where do we know the word kri from?
Just a second. Where do we know what?
Word kri.
Kri?
Yeah.
Where else do we see the word kri? Do you know? Does anybody
Heap.
know where else?
It's heap or
Yeah, in what context do we talk about kri? Shuli, do you know? Or you don't know? I'm sorry?
I'm asking.
So a kri is, does anybody else know what other context you the word kri?
No.
Not offhand. Okay. So a kri is used. You'll see it a lot in Seder Zra'im because a kri would be the pile of sheaves of grain. It's also called a kri. When they would
So-
take the grain and pile it up, that would be called a kri.
So it's not in Tanakh?
I don't think that it appears in Tanakh.
Not even en route.
Yeah, I don't think it appears in Ruth. I don't think it's a biblical term offhand. We could take a look. Usually I research these things on my own time, but we can look in Jastro and he'll tell us if it's biblical.
You're looking for
Hebrew. Here we go. Biblical Hebrew is the verb form, lichrot, which is to dig, and that does appear. But a kri as a noun,
כמו קורא פחם, קריאה.
כמו מה?
קורא פחם, או קריאה.
קורא פחם.
או קריאה של מנהרה.
Ken, right? So it's digging, right? Right. In that sense, it's digging. But the word kri as a noun form, I don't think could find it in Tanakh, and I will look into that. I have other sources to look at, but I think we'll come back to it. The Li Neder, I'll check it out for next time. Just a second. No, wrong one. Oh no, it's also the wrong one. Just a second. I apologize. I thought I had mastered this, but I still haven't. Okay.
oh yeah.
Kamin Kri, like a pile, and there was like a gathering of all of the ash. Tamim Allah alav kashosh miyad kur guzmak. Right. So this is actually an exaggeration. The also says this is an exaggeration. That would be a huge amount. They never let that much gather up. But it just means it was like a ton, like we'd say like a ton of ash. It wasn't really a ton, but it was a lot, right? To make it look nice. They wouldn't remove the deshin out to the outside, even though there was a huge gathering onto the altar. So they would look like a lot of korbanot were on the Mizbeach. Yamav lo nitatzel, right? So Kohen never was lazy. Kolmar mashayat deshen kolkach. Maybe it should be done, whatever. That would, in that a lot of ash had accumulated. Lo mechamat atzluta kohanim. It wasn't because the kohanim were lazy. El lenoi, it was for the beauty. Laharot shekorbanot harbe al gabei hamizbeach, to show that a lot of korban had been brought. So that was a certain aesthetic that they had, right? To let it look like a lot of deshen had gathered up.
So that's specifically on regalim.
Yes.
Okay.
Otherwise, they would keep some on the tapuach. In other words, I think what we understand from the Mishnah is that it says hechelu malin ba'efer al gabei hatapuach, right? So the fellow who did the trumat deshen, he took whatever amount of deshen down and put it at the at the beit deshen, and then later he would have to change his clothes and take it outside of the Beit HaMikdash. But after he did that, so these other Kohanim are coming and they're taking other ash and pushing it to the middle to make this tapuach in the middle of the Mizbeach. So they didn't remove all of the ash every day. But for practical purposes, they probably, different times, they would probably have to remove a certain amount to make sure that there was room on the Mizbeach to do the other things they needed to do on the Mizbeach. And we will get to that when we get back to Yoma, the different things that were, maybe it's also here in Tamid somewhat, the different things that were going on in different parts of the Mizbeach. The next thing, actually, I want to draw a picture. I'll try a crude picture on the whiteboard here. We'll start to learn it. Hechelu ma'alin b'gizrin l'sader eish ha'ma'aracha. So then the Kohanim, whose job it was to bring up the wood, the logs of wood or the branches of wood onto the Mizbeach, they would start to bring up the gizrin, to arrange them on the fire of the ma'aracha. Does everybody see the Mizbeach again?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so right, so they would bring the gizrin onto the Mizbeach. So if you remember, that was one of the that was part of the pais, right? People who were going to bring up the gizrim. So the next thing to do is they're going to start to feed the fire for the day. And that's a mitzvah from the Torah, right? That they had to bring gizrei tzim onto the Mizbeach. The Sader Esha Maracha, right? In the Maracha, that's what I want to mention. Now that I have this picture, right? So this whole area is the Maracha. This is called the Maracha, where the parts where the wood or could be fire are these places here. So they would start to gizrei tzim on the Maracha. And is it true that any kind of wood would be kosher to bring to the Maracha? Hey, yes. All of any kind is kosher to bring the Maracha, chutz mishel zayit v'shel gefen, except for olive wood and grapevine wood. But these were what they used. This is what they were accustomed to using. The murbiyot shiltain, branches from a fig tree, v'shel egos, from a nut tree, v'shel eitz shemen, and from an oil tree. The Bartanura will explain. So everything was kosher to use except for Eitz Zayit and Eitz Geffen, which there's a reason for. So Ma'alin Begizrin, they would bring up the logs. Shnei Eitzim Arukin Umushufin Hayuim Letoch Orech Hamaracha. So they would bring up two long, sanded or smoothed logs to put into length by the length of the maracha. Tichtiv uviyah aleh hakohen etzim baboker melamed shituna shnei etzim. Right, it teaches us that they had to bring two etzim. Right, so this is the pasuk. Shal mizbeach tukad bo lo tichbeh. The fire that's on the altar would be burnt in it, and it will not go out, right? It should not go out. So every morning, put a tzim onto the mizbeach. Yarach aleh ha'olah, and then they would arrange on olah, in other words, the parts of the animal. Viktir aleh chavei shlamim, and they would also burn on it the fats of the shlamim.
How big is the maracha? There was something in Amot the last time, but
yes.
I don't remember.
No, actually, I didn't get into it, and I think if I remember, it's all spelled out in Midot. I think this that I've added here, I think is 24 amot by 24 amot, if I remember correctly. It's large. It's quite large.
So they had to step on the maracha to do this Trumat Hadeshen.
No, they wouldn't step onto the maracha. This area here, unfortunately, I was trying to figure out if I could get a second. Here, if I just wait a second.
It's a lot. 24, 8 meters.
Yeah, it's big. It's quite big. It's at least 24 by 24. I think that's the cheshbon. And I apologize. I really wanted to prepare that for today, and I was a little bit out of. But I remember it's pretty big. This outline here is not the part that's going around the marach is a place where they can stand. Nobody has to stand on the maracha. This
but they need sticks which are at least 4 or 5 meters long to get to the center,
yes.
to the tapuach.
Yes. They would have that, and I think those were the tzinorot. So the magrefot, like the rakes, and the tzinorot, I think would be these longish kinds of poles that they used to maneuver things that were on top of the maracha.
Yes.
I think that's what the tzinorot would be. So, yeah, it was, it was real work. Like, it was genuine work. And one of the reasons I'm going to emphasize that again is because when we come back to Yoma, not all of the things that are being happening now are things that had to be done by the Kohen Gadol, but he had a lot of the actual work in the Beit HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. The Kohanim, when they were doing their jobs, they had a lot to do. Did everybody see the Mishnah? Yeah, okay. Since the Mishnah taught us that they started to bring up the logs, stam, without qualification, below kamafaresh me'eza minshal etzizrin. Sorry, and it didn't tell what kind of wood they would make the logs from. So, in other words, Bartur is explaining the Mishnah asks a question on itself. And I think we've learned enough Mishnah, you've all learned enough Mishnah, to know that this kind of question in the Mishnah is rare. It's very uncommon to see questions at all in the Mishnah, right? Like when you start learning brachot, Mishnah uncharacteristically there begins with a question, but it's rare that a question is asked. And here, it would seem like, if I were to say this from a maybe more academic point of view, I think what it indicates is that this first line of the Mishnah, that was an early Mishnah. And then later, when they were editing the Mishnah, this was added in. This is like on the first line. And that's what the Bartanura is pointing out. Since it said that they start to bring up the logs to arrange them on the Marach, it doesn't say what the Gizrin were. What were they made out of? So the Mishnah, probably from a later Mishnah, asks, and and any wood could have been used. So it says, Hain, Shane Hain. So it answers its own question and says, yes. Klom say, Hakol kshe chutz mishel zayit v'shel gefen. All kinds of wood would be kosher, except for olive wood, for grapevines. Dasurin mishum yishuv eretz. It's forbidden to burn them on the Mizbech. It's forbidden to burn them generally because of the settlement of the land of Israel. L'fi toanim perot, because they bear fruit. So that would be reason not to use them, because we don't want people starting to take wood, fruit-bearing trees, because we want the fruit-bearing trees to bear fruit, so tribute to the general settlement of the country.
However, we do bring fig wood.
Yes, so he will explain that forthwith. I'm glad you mentioned, right? So then right away you should say, well, what about the fig wood? Okay, so you did ask it. And also we don't know what Eitz Shemen is. But he brings another perush. We eat the yesh omrim. Some people say ta'ama talpi shehen nasim deshin miyad. I think the tough here is, I should have taken lefi shehen nasim deshin miyad, because the reason that they bring that they wouldn't bring eitz zayit or eitz gefen is because they burn too quickly. They become ash immediately. And we want something that's going to burn longer. It's going to keep a fire, like a real fire going. So according to that, it's not because they bear fruit. Murbiot, anafim shalteina. Does anybody else know where we use this word murbiot in the Mishnah? Not everybody came to my sheet, Hoshana Rabbah. But does anybody know?
Can't for the life of me remember.
That's okay. When it talks in Sukkah, when it talks about the mitzvah of the Hoshanot, right? That they would go and they would bring the willow branches. They were murbiot. They were called murbiot. They were these huge branches. They were taller, right? The Mizbeach at its height is 10 amot. And then these would be 11 amot, so that they would stick above the top of the karnot of Mizbeach. The karnot, right? Each corner of the Mizbeach stuck up amma by 1 amma in each corner. And then these would go on top of them. So murbiyot seems to not just a branch. From that, it seems to indicate a large branch. So they would bring murbiyot anafim shel ta'ena, right? Branches from a fig tree. Here to answer Michael's question, the dafka ta'enim ra'ot, only bad figs. The lo avdi pere, that in other words, only bad bad fig trees is what he means. Only bad fig trees. The abde feri make that didn't bear fruit, that didn't make fruit. Fig trees, I'm not a big botanical expert, but I know that fig trees are an interesting species because when the fruit doesn't all come out and ripen at the same time. It happens over a period of, I think, a few months, if I remember correctly, at least a few weeks. So I guess if a fig tree isn't bearing, so I'm not sure what he means. If he means that a particular fig tree wasn't bearing fruit, or there were certain species of fig trees that didn't really bear very much fruit. So I'm not sure. But in any event, that was one thing that they would have used. And also shel eitz shem. He says, Hoseh shemen afar simon, that makes afar simon oil, persimmon oil. Vani shamati, and it was the Bartanur is now speaking for himself. And this aside, when he's saying Vani shamati, it indicates what we know about the Bartanura, that most of his Perush were carefully edited pieces, mostly from Rashi or the Rambam or other Meforshim, right? In words, he curated his most of his Perush. But here he's speaking in his own voice. Vani shamati, and I heard, Shuhu ha'ilan shekorim belaz fino. Uva Aravi, Tzinobar, right? So the Tzinobar is something I think we've heard of. V'yafal gav de'etz ma'achalhu, even though that's also a tree that bears edible fruit. Ein bo tzorech kamo begefen b'zayit. It doesn't have the same kind of need, or I could even say like a modern Hebrew, and it wasn't consumed. It didn't have the same kind of consumption need as grapes and olives. In other words, grapes and olives are basic crops, right? Those are very basic crops, but afar simon is not as needed for just the regular functioning of the economy. So they may have yes.
It also seems to me that one can't arbitrarily cut parts from a zait and a geffen without damaging it. They have to be pruned very carefully. And so you can't just say, well, I need some more wood, I'm going to cut it off. Whereas if you have a fig tree or some other tree, then it can sustain a lot more pruning and culling of its wood.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Based on the little that I know, and having looked at fig and these other kinds of trees, I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, I can find out more about that. I will. I'll see what else I can find out. But that's what they did. And I'm sorry, this is the end of Bartanura here. Hilkach lo asruhu mishum yeshuva shel Eretz Yisrael. So they didn't forbid taking from this eitz shemen. They didn't forbid it because of the settlement of the land of Israel. Kader shasru hagefen bazayit, the way they had forbidden the grape and olive trees. So I think to finish off today, let's look at Mishnah Dalid.
This could be a model for why you don't cut down the Amazonian forests.
Because
it's fundamental to the
Just community.
yeshuv of the globe.
right, we could argue that it's for Yeshuvo Shel Olam, right? It's
Exactly.
just for the general settlement of the world. So yeah, we should take a tip from here. But does anybody else want to say something about that though? It's a very interesting point, right? In other words, it wasn't that we just take and put wood willy-nilly to the Mizbeach, but there's a scale that goes into there's real thought and there's a real moral concern about the kind of wood we put on the Mizbeach. Right, and that's what Shuli's getting at. If anybody else wants to elaborate on that, I invite
I mean,
you
these
say.
are these. And
Oh, you up.
Michael, you're muted most of the time. Start from the beginning.
okay, yeah. I mean, these are trees that grow very slowly, and they last. I mean, an olive tree will last for centuries, but they grow very slowly and need elaborate care and pruning. And so it's, I mean, in some sense, one almost has a social relationship with the tree. I mean, when they say, I think when it says, when they talk about etz sadeh, when we talk about etz sadeh, that would be the quintessential etz sadeh.
Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, right? Because man is the tree of the field, is the literal translation, the pasuk in Dvarim. But yeah, you're right. I think that's another layer.
It's a
real
poem by Natan Zach, who was today buried.
He passed away. He just passed away. But Paul, what poem was that? Ki ha'adam what poem? Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh?
נכון. Yeah, it's
אז אני לא מכיר.
It's a quote, yeah. It's a quote. It's the Tanakh, yeah. Natan Zach, he has a poem, very famous.
I have to look that up. Okay, I knew that he was a poet, and I knew he just passed away. It was so okay. Matim lanu. We're going to look a little bit more at the mechanics of the maracha. Seder ha-maracha gedola mizracha v'chazita mizracha. So the large ma'aracha was in the east, and the chazita, its front was in the east. But we'll explain the chazita. In other words, we'll explain this a little bit more when we look at the Bamura. Its front was seen from the east. V'roshei hagizrin hapnimiyim hayu nogim b'tapuach. The heads, or the tops of or let's say the ends of the logs, of the inner logs, would touch the tapuach. V'revach haya bein hagizrin. There was a space between the logs. Shayitin et alita misham. So that they would light the alita. The alita is I'll just skip to the Bartanura. The alita is chariot v'kismikin. Right, they would be like these thin twigs, or that's
kindling.
The kindling, right? It's the kindling. When you make a fire, right? So of course you can't set fire to the logs straight away. You have to take smaller branches to light, because they will catch fire quickly, and then you build it up, and eventually the logs will catch on fire, and then the logs are what really make the fire last, right? That they will burn for many hours. Tochvin ben agdolim lahatzita esh. So they would stick this kindling between the large logs to set the fire, right? To light the fire. The word alita How does that mean what it means? Alita lashon a. Does anybody know what the aliyah was? Aliyah is the fatty tail of the sheep. It's called the aliyah. So it's from that language of aliyah, al shem zanvot ha'udim, because of the tails of the firebrands. It was reminiscent of the tail. The tails come off from when it was lit, as I imagine. So ma'aracha gedola, lefi sheyesh od ma'aracha acheret, right? So there was really so what I said before is true. In other words, the ma refers actually to the entire top, but also refers to specific areas where there were fires on the top part. Lefi sheyesh od ma'aracha acheret. There was another place where they would arrange a fire, because there was another one, Kari Lahach Ma'aracha Gdola. Because of that, they called this one the big Ma'arach. Shalosh Ma'arachot Hayu Sham B'yom. There were 3 Ma'arachot there every day. Achat Ma'aracha Gdola Shesorfim Aleha Tamid. One was the big Ma'aracha, the one we're talking about, and that's where they would burn the pieces of the animal that was brought for the Korban Tamid. Vashenit ma'aracha pchuta mimena, another ma'aracha that was less than it. Hikru ma'aracha shel ketoret. That ma'aracha was called the ma'aracha of the ketoret, and why? Shenotlim mimena gechalim b'machta l'ketoret shemaktirim b'boker u'ben arbayim. That's where they take the coals from that second ma'aracha to bring into the Beit HaMikdash, to put on the altar that's inside the Beit HaMikdash, to burn the Ketoret. So why did they have a third one? Einam mishtat klum. It wasn't there to burn anything. Elul ha'esh. It was there to keep a fire going. Tichtiv ha'esh al mizbech tukad bo. Right, and we know the end of the pasuk. It's right. It's the same pasuk as we saw before, but I highlighted that part. Eshal mizbech tukad bo lo tichbe. Right. It doesn't go out. So there always has to be a fire there. It doesn't go out. Zuma arachash lishit shel kiyush. So because of that, they had a third ma'aracha to always have fire burning. So this is well marked up now, but now you see there's this is apparently right, this is the eastern ma'aracha, and the slightly smaller one would have been for the Ketoret. And they don't show the third one. I believe, if I remember, I think the third one actually was up here. But we'll get into this a little bit more in the future, because according to some opinions, there were more ma'arachot. But everybody holds there at least 3. Everyone holds there at least 3. Chazita Mizracha. So its front was from the east. Marit Panea, right? In other words, the site of its face, the Hainuach the Chalon Shemaracha, the Tzad Mizrach Shel Mizbeach, meaning the opening and the window of the Maracha, the eastern side of the Mizbeach. So what he means, if I may try to do a crude drawing here, when you were looking at the Maracha from the eastern side, so then let's say you would see the front of a log here and the front of the log here, and then there would be other wood that would be stacked on top of it, and then the alita that we talked about would be here, but this area here, this would be Raiklon, right? In other words, this would be like a window where you would be able to see, as it were, into the maracha itself, into the fire. That's what he's trying to describe. This would be the chalam. My first time using a whiteboard on Zoom. Roshei hagizrin hapnimiyim, right? So the inner lawns hayu arukim ad shayu nogim b'tapuach, until they would reach and touch the tapuach, right? So it means that the logs would go. For some reason I'm not pressing the right thing here. I have things pressed. There we go. They would reach into the tapuach. This placement here, I have to check that. But anyway, it gives us a basic idea.
So the tapuach was a pile of ashes. It wasn't a structure in itself.
Right, exactly. But again, I think we talked about this a while ago, talking about deshen. The reason it's called deshen and not efer in the Torah is because deshen, right? It's a word that implies fat, right? So the idea is that this is, it's the fatty deposit, like it's the burnt fatty parts, which are, semi-ash. So you could imagine that you could really make a pile of it, because if it was really just ash, it would be hard to hold it in one place. But I imagine that there was a fair amount of fat that was still mixed into it, so you could push it and make it, make like a nice roundish pile in the middle. So are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I think let's stop here. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll continue next week.